What are the potential consequences of President Trump's battle against Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you all the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for your great support of FFF. So, Richard, there's a battle royale going on between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve. Of course, there's a lot of battles royale taking place between Trump and lots of people. But let's focus in on this one with Powell, because it really does raise some fascinating and important issues with respect to libertarianism, monetary policy, and the principled case for liberty that we make here at FFF. The situation as I see it is this. You've got a central bank that engages in monetary central planning, which creates what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. I mean, this is what we've seen with the paper money standard since the 1930s, the Federal Reserve since 1913, is just constant chaos with respect to the value of money. And if you look at the value of the dollar since 1913, I mean, it's like just a downward trend line. And you see just massive inflationary chaos, along with the booms and the busts, the recessions, the depressions, the boom periods, and so forth. So you've got a built-in engine of chaos there with central banking. So when the Fed engaged in this quantitative easing for around 10 or 11 years or so, all of a sudden they realized prices are rising in the economy. That reflects a debased currency, because when you're printing lots and lots of money, the value of the currency is going to drop, and that means it can buy less, and that's reflected in higher prices. So they start panicking, as they generally do, and they start raising interest rates to bring the price level down, which they sometimes call inflation. So it's kind of confusing, because real inflation is when they're inflating the money supply, but they've come to call the rising prices that reflect that phenomenon inflation. But in any event, they look at the price level and they say, oh, we need to really tighten up here. So again, more chaos. But that's what they're trying to do. So along comes Trump and launches this enormous tariff war against, lots of countries. I don't know exactly how many, 70 or 80 or so, and especially against China, that introduces just a whole new dimension of chaos into the economic system. The stock market plummeting one day and then zooming up the next day, and nobody knows what's going to happen. He extols the virtues of tariffs and trade wars, and then the very next day says, oh, well, I'm going to suspend them for 90 days because apparently the long-term bond situation made a lot of people scared over the precarious nature of the monetary system there with respect to long-term bonds. But he maintained the tariffs and actually increased them against China. And now China's decided to retaliate. And my own hunch, I don't have any evidence to support this, but China is the second largest debt holder of the U.S. government in the world. Japan is first. And my hunch, I forget how much in bonds they own, but I think it's in the neighborhood of 700 trillion or 700 billion. And my hunch is that they might be dumping some of those bonds on the market and loading up on gold, and that may be contributing to the chaos. But in any event, so what Trump has done, he says, well, he's calling Powell too late. That's his nickname for Powell, that Powell's always too late in lowering interest rates or increasing interest rates, depending on what he's trying to accomplish. So he's pressuring Powell into lowering interest rates because he sees the chaos and most likely the recession that his tariffs and trade wars are causing. So he's calling on Powell to give this artificial burst of free money, freely newly printed money, the same kind of phenomenon we've seen throughout the history of the Fed. It's kind of like injecting sugar into your veins and getting that quick fix of energy. But in long terms, it's just devastating for an economy and for people when the Fed is artificially debasing the currency in that way. And so far, Powell is saying, no, I'm standing fast. We are independent of what you are doing with the tariffs. And I think what upset Trump also is that Powell went and gave a speech to some group where he referred to Trump's tariffs and said that this has provided a whole new sense of unpredictability in the market, and they're studying the situation to see how they handle this, because he's implying that Trump's tariffs and trade wars are going to throw us into a recession. And so Trump is threatening to fire him, which technically and legally he can't do. The Fed has a term independent, a term fixed that is independent of the presidential will. But I think also what Trump's doing is he's setting the foundation for blaming the Federal Reserve when the recession comes as a result of his tariffs and trade wars. And he can say, oh, well, you see, this wasn't because of my tariffs or trade wars. It's because of the Federal Reserve. And of course, the question is, what is the solution to all this? You can get yourself mired into, oh, well, the Fed ought to do this and Powell ought to do that and Trump ought to do this. But really, I mean, to me, it's the solution is built into the whole system. The tariffs are the problems. The trade war is the problem. The monetary central banking is the problem. The whole solution is what you and I have been talking about for many, many years, and that's separate economy in the state and separate money in the state. What do you think?
Well, for the viewers and listeners, let me sort of give a little bit of a institutional context. The Federal Reserve was established by an act of Congress in 1913. It opened its doors in early 1914. It has a board of governors, 7 members. Each of them holds a term of 14 years. The chairman holds a chairmanship position of 4 years, which is renewable. All the board members are nominated by the president and approved by the Senate, like an ambassador would be to a foreign country, or a member of the cabinet. So in this sense, that to say that the Federal Reserve is somehow a private or independent organization separate from the government is pretty much of a half-truth. If you're nominated by the president, approved by the Senate, and get renewed in this type of fashion, it's hard to say that you're really a private organization. But that's the structure of it. So the question is, can Trump fire Powell? No president has ever attempted to fire a board chairman prior to the holder's end of his term. Now, in the case of Jeremy Powell, he was actually appointed by Donald Trump during Donald Trump's first term in office as president. And then he was renewed by Joe Biden in the same chairmanship position. And right now, his term runs until May of next year, 2026. So basically, however impatient and exacerbated that Trump might be, the fact is that unless he undertakes the very tricky matter of whether he legally can remove him or not, Powell is the Fed chairman for at least another years, May of next year. The reason why they're in this battle, part of which you talked about, and I'm just going to reinforce this, is that the tariffs have created a huge amount of economic uncertainty, certainly internationally, but domestically. And especially in the context of Trump basically changing his mind almost every day. He says the purpose of the tariffs are to bring industries back to America. That's what his definition of make America great again. Our steel production, our aluminum production, our automobiles, our this, our that, our pharmaceuticals, everything should be made in America. In other words, America will be great when it is basically nationally self-sufficient and everything that Trump considers the core of what a great America should be producing for itself. Then the next day, he says, no, it isn't a matter of producing everything ourselves. It's a matter of trade deals. They treat us, other countries treat us unfairly. They have high tariffs. They have non-tariff import restrictions. They've cheated us. They've taken advantage of us. We have these trade deficits. We buy more from them than they buy from us. We have to teach them a lesson. And then the next day he says, well, what this is really about is raising money to pay off the debt and to end the deficits. We're going to, beautiful tariffs. It's my favorite word in the dictionary. And it's bringing in billions upon billions and billions. Well, you see, there's a contradiction here. If the tariff is to protect American manufacturers in a higher cost hothouse environment from foreign competition, then you have to set the tariffs so high that either the foreign competitors can't bring their products in and viably sell them at all, given the tariff pricing, um, or with minimal importing of those goods. But the point is, the higher the tariff, and therefore the smaller the selling of foreign goods in America, the less tariff revenue you raise because it is a tax, which, by the way, the American importer pays, not the foreign seller. But the higher the tariff, the less is brought into the country, the less the tariff revenue. If you want to maximize tariff revenue, you have to have a lower tariff because the lower you go, the more items will be brought into the country to sell in the American market. And the larger the volume at the lower tariff, the more likely you're going to be generating greater sums of tax revenue. I'm just saying the logic of the positions are inconsistent. You either want to have it so high that foreign goods don't come in, but then you collect no or virtually no tariff revenues, or you set it low enough to have a price quantity of foreign goods coming in that maximizes your tariff revenue. And then you have those billions that Trump, in his delusion, thinks is going to save America. But these are all contradictory. But the point is, he changes this every day. He imposes these high tariffs, and then the next day, as you were saying, he declares a 90-day moratorium. Now, the uncertainty that this is throwing the world economy into and the American economy into, where are my supply chains? Am I going to have to try to find alternative sources that he's not attacking, or do I have to create the supply chains at home? Should I invest more? Should I invest less? What's the economic environment going to be? So all of this is setting off signals of people being concerned about a slowdown in the growth of the U.S. economy or even a recession. That will not be good, since if you're in a recession, that's not Trump's definition of making America great again. Uh, the other element of this is the national debt. The fact is that in spite of what he says about tariffs bringing in oodles of money and Elon Musk, finding $2 trillion of waste to eliminate, this is not happening either. So as a consequence of this, the deficit funding has to go on. There's going to be another $2 trillion of it this year under Trump's watch. Plus, there are trillions of dollars of the existing national debt that are coming up for maturity in the coming year, over the next year, which means you either pay off the principal, which the government won't do, or you roll over the debt. You get people to say, okay, we'll just extend the loan for another 10 years, 30 years, and we just negotiate over the rate of interest on the rolled over debt. Well, the higher the rate of interest, as the Fed has been notching it up, the higher the debt payments this creates for the United States government. And already they borrow money to pay the interest on the existing debt, besides current account expenses that they have, jet fuel for Trump's Air Force One, so on. So as a consequence is that his policies are threatening higher prices through tariffs. The economy is going into uncertainty of a recession. The Federal Reserve is being cautious, and he wants Powell and the Fed to just lower interest rates dramatically, to flood the economy with money, as you were saying, and to have this temporary stimulus, a lot of rising prices, more money to spend, and then this short-term boom to make him look good. And Powell isn't doing this. And this is what is causing this tension between them. Now, the Fed is guided by a whole set of policy perspectives, which is based upon a certain theoretical framework, which broadly defined, remains the macroeconomic model of a blending of Keynesianism and Chicago school monetarism. But all of which, whether it be Keynesian or monetarist, works under the assumption that it is the duty and necessity of a central bank to micromanage the money supply and interest rates in such a manner to maintain economic stability, full employment as it's referred to, and stable prices. Now, they think they're trying to do this. They're trying to keep inflation in a certain narrower range. They're trying to prevent the inflation, the economy from falling, and therefore into a severe inflation. They're concerned about whether a recession will occur, and they're following their own you know rules of the road here, based upon the theories they have. Now, that's separate from whether it's good or bad from a free market perspective, an Austrian economic perspective. They're just following this, and they're meant to. They're meant to. It has long been recognized that when governments directly control the hand of the monetary printing press, it will always and constantly be abused. It's Democrats who want this, Republicans who want that. This president is after this, that president is after that. So they've set up this institutional thing of like, well, they're independent. And the political winds of the changing currents of policies can't be bending them. And Powell is basically trying to defend that. But as you were saying, at the end of the day, the only way that this type of agenda and problem can be eliminated is two things: free trade and this chaos and this uncertainty and this disruption of the entire global economy by reversing everything that Trump has done. Now, a person like Trump doesn't have the ego to just say, I've been wrong. Oh my God, on this policy, I've been a loser. I'm not great. And say, reverse everything I've done over the last month and a half with these tariffs. He doesn't have the ability to do that. And so as a consequence, he's just going to continue with that. Uh, and if he can, he will try to see if there's a way to get rid of Powell, which legally may not be possible. Most legal authorities say that it would be very tricky since it's never been done. And presumably put someone in who will just turn on the monetary printing press. But the only way to get his hand off the monetary printing press, or the sort of presumption of monetary central planning by the Board of Governors, or the political currents of other ideologies, is basically to separate money from the state. Now, that's obviously not going to happen overnight as well. But the idea is that ultimately money should be decided, that is, what is used as money and for what purposes should be decided by people in the marketplace. If they want to use gold, if they want to use silver, some mix of these, some other commodity, that's the free choices of consumers buying and selling and with producers in the marketplace. And the other thing is just to get government out of the banking system. Central banking is just another form of central planning. That's why, as you were saying, we've had the booms and the busts, these inflationary cycles. And the only way to do this is to depoliticize, denationalize the banking system, which means to establish a competitive free banking system that is totally outside of the hands of the control or influence of government. Unfortunately, neither of these are likely to happen in any immediate future. And as a consequence, we're faced with this uncertainty of this roller coaster of inflation, recession, the ping pong back and forth of what's going to happen with tariffs, and how do you plan for anything 6 months ahead when you don't know what the president is going to say in 6 hours. And this is the dilemma we're in. But at the end of the day, the only way is a radical institutional change, separating money and banking from the state and leaving it to the market, and therefore getting rid of politics out of the economic system entirely.
Well, you've raised a lot of good points. Let me just address one of them, which I think is really a fascinating aspect of what's going on here, and that's the issue of the long-term interest rates on the long-term bonds. Because as I understand it, the interest that they're having to pay on the national debt, the federal government's debt, now exceeds what they pay the Pentagon and the CIA and the National Security State.
Yes,
Uh,
it's almost $900 billion last time.
900 billion. So if those long-term, if the interest rates rise on those long-term bonds, that's a considerably large amount of money
Yes,
because of the quantity of the federal debt that's
yes,
growing every day. And so I think part of what's happening here is that when you do all these bad things to people all over the world, I mean, it's 70 or 80 countries that he had these tariffs on,
yes,
and trying to really inflict harm on these countries. Well, people don't like that. People don't like when somebody's trying to harm them. And so there's less incentive to buy government debt. It's like people saying, we don't want to have anything to do with you people. Even if it's a sound investment, we don't want to have anything to do with you. And I think that's part of what's going on here is that the demand for US government bonds is diminishing around the world because people don't like the United States. There's Canadians that are canceling uh, homes, vacation homes that they were planned to buy here in the United States, or they're selling vacation homes because they just don't want to have anything to do with the United States. There's tourists from Europe that are canceling vacation plans saying, we don't want to come to your country. And so, why is that a problem? Well, apparently it's a big problem because it made the big bankers in New York and Wall Street and the hedge fund people so nervous when the interest rates on those long-term bonds started soaring suddenly. That had not happened before. In a time of crisis, people ordinarily go in. That's the safe haven, government bonds, U.S. government bonds. This time it didn't happen. And people obviously got really nervous about it. And that's, in my opinion, what pressured Trump to suspend the tariffs for 90 days. Now, I don't know if there's a relationship with that crisis of the interest rates and the banking industry, but I've always felt that the banking industry may be a lot more precarious than they let on to be. That they raised the FDIC limits from 100,000 to 250,000. Why would they do that? If everything's secure, why would you want to make people feel comfortable? Hey, you can keep your 250,000 here. And I know darn well that there's enough money in that fund to cover several banks if they fail, but there darn sure isn't enough money if there's an industry-wide banking collapse. And I found it also interesting when those three banks collapsed a couple of years ago that they covered everybody in one of those banks, everybody even over 250,000, because I think they were scared that people might start runs on the banks. And I think that's the terrifying thing in these people's minds, runs on the banks, like in the 1929, 1930s. Um, so when you put all this together, there's some strange things happening here that I think are making some people in the know very nervous. You see the dollar collapsing here. I forget how much it is, but like a 10% drop in the last 2 weeks or so. You see the government bond market getting shaky. You see Trump starting to panic and trying to pressure the Fed into lowering interest rates. This is not a good situation, Richard, but it's all part and parcel of central planning, of taxation. I mean, did you ever think you'd see the day when Republicans would be celebrating more tax revenues to the government? We're raising more tax revenues to the government, which means sucking more money out of people's pockets with this sales tax on imported goods, which is what a tariff is. When you put all this together, things don't look good at all for this country, Richard. A lot of people around the world hating America, and I think that's what's being reflected in this crisis with the bond markets.
yes. People, as you were saying, have decided not to vacation in the United States, not to buy American goods. It's a personal boycott choice. Um, Foreign visitors to the U.S. are complaining of being uh, harassed, uh, irritated with the amount of bureaucratic uh, rigmarole they're forced to go through with the customs agents when they come in, arriving into the United States. With the paranoia, even a tourist might somehow be someone who will say something critical of the U.S. government and its foreign policy. it might be terrorist supporting. So we have to vet this visitor who wants to just, go to a few shows on Broadway. I mean, it's just madness. But I think that the core of the problem that set him off this 90-day abeyance on the tariffs was the bond market. If the bond market tanks, that is, people either will not buy government bonds anymore to continue to fund the continuing deficits, or if they won't roll over the debt, that is, rebuy bonds just given a different maturity date on them, or if they start dumping bonds, those prices go down, interest rates shoot up because bond prices and interest rates move inversely with each other. And as a consequence of that, that not only undermines the business environment in the United States with skyrocket interest rates, but then the bond market, as you were saying, is the basis of so much of the global financial structure. I mean, U.S. bonds have been viewed as a safe haven. Wars, revolutions, inflations, unattractive business environments in their own countries. You're always going safe and secure. The full faith and credit of the U.S. government behind the U.S. bonds. And Trump basically has undermined that. Now, you could say that the fiscal policies of the United States were moving America in this unsustainable direction anyway. And critics of these policies have been saying that for a very long time. But what Trump has done is magnified and accelerated these doubts, concerns, hesitations, and fears on the part of those who otherwise deal in the bond market. And if that collapses, then this is a serious matter for the U.S. economy. And then we're really talking about a severe and serious and prolonged economic downturn. And Trump might as well forget about ever making America great again.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize that this isn't a Donald Trump problem any more than it would have been a Harris problem or a Biden problem. This is a system problem. We've got bad systems in this country. The monetary system is a bad system. The tariff trade war, where the president is vested with the authority to set tariffs and start trade wars, is a bad system. The whole income tax, the whole welfare state, the warfare state, that what we're dealing with is a series, the drug war system, the immigration control system. We're dealing with a whole series of systems that have been brought into existence since the 20th century that are bad systems. And therefore, the solution is not to get better people in public office, a better president who can really manage this and really make America great. You can't make America great with bad systems. To make America great, you do some soul searching and you realize, hey, we got to get rid of these bad systems and we got to replace them with good systems. And those systems are, as you mentioned, free trade, separation of money in the state, a free market monetary system, voluntary charity, economic liberty, and open immigration, open borders. These are systems that are not only moral and based on moral principles, they're also based on freedom principles, and they're based on principles of prosperity and harmony with the people of the world. Let me shift gears here, Richard. Just we're about out of time, but this is we just had the 250th anniversary. I think it was on April 19th of the battles of Lexington and Concord, when the British colonists really launched the Revolutionary War. And so I thought we ought to acknowledge that. And I think the big lesson I come away with that is the horrors of gun control. I mean, the British soldiers were going to Lexington and Concord for one purpose, and that was to find the guns and military supplies of the colonists. They were going to confiscate them because they know that a disarmed citizenry lacks the means to oppose a tyrannical regime, which was their own government. We often forget that. The British government was not a foreign government. These were British citizens taking up arms against their own government. And but the British government understood, as every tyrannical government does, that if you disarm the citizenry, then that's the key to obedience and compliance among the citizenry. And the people at Lexington and Concord had hidden, though they knew that the British were coming. They had hidden their guns, and they were ready for them when the battle started.
I just add to that is that it's important to realize is that why had this all arisen? Well, taxes. They seem small by our modern day standards, but for the time, the colonists felt that the British were imposing unjustified, egregious taxes to support programs that they didn't want to see funded, even in concerning things in North America. And this was all taxes imposed upon them without, as they said, taxation without representation. And then when you had the Boston Tea Party and other things, what was the consequence? Well, the British occupied Boston. They imposed even stronger regulations. The people felt that their rights were further oppressed. Their freedom to say what they want, do what they wanted, were threatened. And so they were planning to, if necessary, defend themselves against this occupying oppressor, even if it was the same government, the occupying oppressor, by taking up arms if necessary. And what's important here is not only that they had the arms to protect themselves, but they represented the courage and willingness to take up arms, face the British forces, and resist them, suffering casualties, and then driving the British back to Boston, that is, out of this area of Lexington and Concord outside of Boston, by every means possible, getting behind trees, boulders, and just shooting the retreating forces to force them out and to protect their arms and their liberties. And eventually, it resulted next year in the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the declaring that we hold these truths to be self-evident. And that became the basis of not just a shot, but a revolution heard around the world. Because now there was a people and a budding country that said the role of government is to secure individual liberty, not oppress it. That the government is there to guard freedom, not to prevent it. And that government is a servant and not a master. And that the master is the individual who should be viewed as having self-determination to manage and run his own life peacefully as he chooses and considers meaningful in free association with all others in society. That is the revolution that transformed all of modern history. And this is a great celebration, 250 years of Lexington and Concord, and next year, the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, and it's those principles that Americans would be wise to reflect upon in a period of self-examination as to where we are as a country today and where we need to go in the future.
Yes.
Okay. On that note, Richard, we'll wrap things up. As always, I greatly enjoyed the visit, and thank you all for tuning in again. Thank you again for your great support of our efforts here at FFF. And Richard, I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.